Okay, just a brief introduction before we start. I'm Anna Pino, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm the CEO here at Lighthouse. And on my left I have Tony Lane, our business performance presenter, Susanna Evans, our people and communication presenter, Wayne Boland, our finance presenter, and Nick McNaughton, our financing business expansion presenter. Unfortunately, Scott, our legal presenter, can't be here today, but I'm sure you're all enjoying his case study. Okay, so thank you to all the presenters for coming along today and for taking us through this journey with our fictional characters, David and Angela and their company Devange. So today's session is all about drawing together the lessons that we've learned through the previous 5 presentations and look at some of the insights that we've gained and how people can apply some of these insights to their own businesses. So I just wanted to start off by asking the question that I think everybody is wondering, all the people that have followed this journey, is do you think that Devange will survive the current situation? So maybe we start with you, Tony. What's your view?
Look, I think I'd probably defer to everybody else to start with. I mean, take the cheats way out. I guess as the author of this thing, it's I've got some inside knowledge as to how it does all turn out. But I think I'll preface it by saying their survival is tenuous and depends on a number of things. And perhaps some of my co-presenters could, perhaps touch on some of the things that might lead it not to survive or to survive and what they think they might need to do.
Okay, maybe we move on to then Susanna, what do you think?
I think it's really dependent on quite a number of things. The way they're going, I don't think so. I think there's a huge communication issue there. There are some thinking style issues. So for those of you who saw that presentation, we're dealing with someone, or the clues indicate that we're dealing with a left brainer and a right brainer, which is really quite different. David is someone who really needs some facts and data and some analysis behind what's happening, and Angela seems to be going off on her own. So that's not a very comfortable position for David. He doesn't really know what's happening. So unless they can sit down and actually work out where each of them are going and how they're going to communicate where the company's going, it's not looking good at this stage.
So do you think it's possible to reach that middle ground?
Yes, with time investment, which means they really need to sit down and have a really good chat.
Wayne, what do you think?
I'd be very, very surprised if they didn't do anything to change, that they would survive. There's a number of issues there that will lead to them failing, obviously, and without doing those changes, I'm sure they'll not survive for very much longer.
Okay, what about from your perspective, Nick, as a potential investor?
I think as with any problems, there's problems that are within your control and there are problems that are outside of their control. The problems that are outside of their control are to a certain extent market-based, they're cyclical, and we're seeing that the economy is making it less appealing for the primary product that they're representing. That's out of their control. What is in their control is the relationship that they've had with the provider of that IP in Germany. That relationship appears to be not going particularly well. I think they also have not made the decision to diversify early enough. They have made the decision to diversify, and Angela is proceeding with that, but my view is that she's probably left that a little bit too late. So those would be my observations at this point.
Okay. So now you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, look, I think there's some pretty interesting insights from my perspective. I guess as an insolvency practitioner, we see these sorts of things come across our desks regularly. And I'm intrigued by Nick's comments in particular, because one of the things that we tend to preach, which is probably anti-entrepreneurial to an extent, is stick to your knitting. Do what you know. And that does have an anti-entrepreneurial flavour to it. But that's always set in a context. And I think in the context of this particular case study, what does come across is that there's not a plan. There's no plan anywhere here. It's knee-jerk, it's haphazard. The points that Susanna makes about communication, well, that starts with the plan. And yes, you could have people thinking in different ways. David's a very sort of rectilinear thinker. Angela's a bit more of a free spirit and trying to sort of grab what's out there and make the best use of her skills for whatever reason. But I think that that classic adage of a failure to plan leads to a plan to fail. In this instance, I can't speak strongly enough to. So I think given where they're at now, Wayne's point, unless there's some drastic change which can be supported by some financial and legal remedies. I mean, they need to shore up the relationship that they have with their German supplier. They need to either exit that relationship in a relatively swift and cheap way. They need, or they need to repair what's broken so that they can shore up their market for their key product. They need to get a better understanding of what their new side venture is actually going to cost and how they're going to run it. And that's all outside of what appears to be a fundamental breakdown in the personal relationship between David and Angela. And that's one thing that perhaps all of the examples hadn't touched on, is that there are key drivers of failures in businesses, and one of the key ones is a breakdown of relationships for whatever reason. And that's certainly on the cards here. So there's a number of things that they need to attend to in order for it to survive. If I was a betting man, which I'm not, I'd probably say it's unlikely, and I probably wouldn't put my money on this one.
Okay. Let me just pick up a point. You were talking about planning. So there's a couple of views about planning out in the entrepreneurial community, and there's always this concern about paralysis by analysis. But at what point do you think David and Angela should have started planning? At what point should they have noticed that there were some changes coming up, and when should they have started making some decisions about planning where they're going to go?
Look, I think that's also a very valid point. It's difficult once you're in the mire of all of this to then bring yourself away from the day-to-day difficulties you're facing and say, right, let's start a planning process. I think, you're right, paralysis by analysis is a often used term, and it's clear from what these people are doing they could well end up in that space. But I think that some planning at the outset of what this business is actually going to do, and if Angela did have a want to capitalise on her professional skills, then I think articulating that fairly early in the discussion, or even separating that from this business and not bringing into the existing venture a level of risk that wasn't there in the past, is probably part of that planning process. As to when that happens, well, now is a really good time for there to be some more thought and discussion about it. But I think, well before we get to this point, there needs to be some discussion about it. It need not be as in depth as producing, strategic plans, business plans, all of that sort of stuff. But there needs to be something that's documented, because without a target, it's very difficult to hit something.
Yeah. What about you, the rest of the panel?
I agree that, but there's two parts of the planning, or three parts of the planning that I think should have been done already. When you've got a business, it's so reliant on that supplier and getting the contracts that are so reliant on that, then you need to have a plan, at least in your mind, of what you would do if something happened to that. It's got to be in the back of your mind when you're so reliant on one source of income. The second thing is that with Angela's business, there should have been two plans, I think, done before she even started, and that was at least plan how they were going to go about it. Now, she may have done that, but it's not clear. But to me, the other one that they needed to do was a cash flow plan, and that's, to me, hasn't been done, because they're just running up expenditure without any idea of whether they're going to have the income, whether they're going to be able to pay any of these expenses. So those are the three things that should have been done before they even start, and now should be the time they look at that, doing that now.
Okay.
In some ways it's too late for the Angela venture.
Okay. See, I think especially in a partnership, you never stop planning. It's something that should be embedded in everything you do. Specifically when you have David in a different location to Angela, if they don't have a plan to follow, it's really dangerous territory, because David may well have a plan in his head, Angela may have a completely different one in her head, and if they're not following some kind of roadmap, we don't actually know where David's going to end up, where Angela's going to end up. So, particularly where you have a number of decision makers, they need to know what is their scope of their decision making, not ability, but what can they make a decision on without consulting the other. That hasn't been discussed at all. And how will we make decisions? Rather than Angela sort of going off. We don't actually know what she's doing. She may not even be working anymore.
I think the credit card.
We just have a few receipts for dinners, So I'm really feeling sorry for David at the moment, because he has no idea and he has no plan to refer to.
So from an investor's perspective, obviously investors expect a certain amount of planning. At what point would investors want to see a plan for something like this?
What I see in this case, Anna, is in fact what we're seeing is the consequences of the decisions or lack of decisions that they made over the last couple of years. So they should have been closer to the vendor from Germany in terms of the commercial relationship with them. Again, it's not just people relationship in a relationship, it's people relationship in a business, and they should have made sure that they were communicating frequently and delivering outcomes for that vendor. That vendor would then not have thought about going direct into their market. I would also actually point out that being a distributor is inherently risky, because obviously you're building the market for another company, and you get to a point of scale when that vendor decides to come into the market directly, and it's never a comfortable conversation. So I'd say that what we're reviewing today is actually the outcome of some poor decisions that were made over the last couple of years. I also think that over that time they should have decided to focus on one thing. They should have either decided to get through the process with the German manufacturer, get to a point where that's either going to be a viable business or not a viable business, before they then split their resources to go off and do something else. So personally, I think what they've done now is they've even weakened their case even more, because they've taken a very limited team of 2 people, they've separated that resource with poor planning, with poor communication, and it lowers their chances of success. That would be my view.
I think one other key point that I guess is the upside to what we as insolvency practitioners in our industry try and profess, is that many people don't put enough effort into planning for the end at the start. And by that I don't mean having an apprehension that what you're going to do is going to fail, but there are always unexpected turns of events that come to pass in business, and it's not uncommon for a key player in a business enterprise, if it's a partnership or any more than one person, to die, to become unable to continue to do what they were doing, or for there to be, as might be the case in this instance, some sort of family law breakup which requires disaggregation of their business activities. And for there to be some planning around those contingencies at the start makes it easier to deal with fragmentation of a business, as seems to be happening in this instance. So that's another element of the planning process that I think has been missed by these two in this particular case.
Can I just comment further on your saying that analysis paralysis can be a problem? The other side of that is that we see too many businesses going into expenditure or activities where they're not then measuring to see whether they're a viable or a worthwhile thing. One example we had a little while ago was a new business that came to us. They were spending tens of thousands of dollars on TV advertising, weren't measuring it at all on whether it was effective or not. But once we started measuring, we found it was a waste of money. And so the measuring part is just as important as the planning part, because the planning doesn't work unless you're measuring what's happening in the plan.
Yeah, good point. So I think the panel agrees that saving this business could be difficult. But I guess just carrying on from the conversation we've just been having, I mean, obviously this is a very complex set of circumstances that we have here with Angela and David. But what kind of advice do you give to your clients about the order in which they should be processing some of these issues? What should, how do they decide what to look at first when you've got a whole bunch of issues that are coming at you at the same time?
From a people perspective, it always seems to be a matter of stepping right back. Mm-hmm. Let's strip everything back and approach it as if you would a team sport. Do we know who the players are? Do we know what their roles are? Do we even know what sport we're all playing? which is I think a key issue with David and Angela. I think they're playing two different games. And really taking stock of where are we now, where are we supposed to be, and what was our purpose in the beginning. So it really is about trying to close off from the current situation and work out, where have we come and are we heading in the right direction? It just, same as if you get lost, on a street somewhere. The first thing you do is you pull over and you bring out the map and you try and work out where you are. So it really is a matter, in my opinion, David and Angela, they need to pull over. Yeah. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they have a map to refer to, which is going to be a real problem.
There's a twofold approach that I tend to apply in these circumstances. Obviously, by the time people come and see me or someone who does what I do, there's a level of urgency about the circumstances they're in generally. So the first approach is a risk-based approach, saying what's the consequence what's the likelihood of future outcomes and what are the consequences of those outcomes. And the second part of the analysis is a wants and needs analysis. So what do you want and what do you need? And that's at a number of different levels. That's personally, and also what does the business want and what does it need? In this instance, I think looking at the particular risks that they face, and I think Nick's already hit on this, that relationship with the supplier, the key contractual relationship that they have, poses the single biggest risk to the business and then the flow-on effects for David and Angela individually. So my focus would probably be starting somewhere around there and then looking at what alternatives they have moving away from that. If saving that relationship is not possible, what are their next steps? From an interpersonal perspective, with their own relationship, again, a wants and needs analysis is important because this isn't a business at its core that Angela could run absent David's involvement. She's not the IT specialist. She doesn't have the relationships with the clients or the service provider. So they're very different discussions once you're looking at a disaggregation of their interests.
Wayne, you're nodding your head there.
Yes, I agree. There's a couple of risks in there that I see from a financial point of view. One of those is the super fund borrowings, which are going to cause an issue very, very shortly. But also any divorce situation might be a very financial risk as well. And in my talk I gave an example that I had someone that was in a very similar situation where the husband was here, the wife was in the Gold Coast, and the situation was very similar and ended up in divorce, and it's virtually paralysed the business at this point in time. So.
What about from an investor's perspective?
Well, I think, again, as my panellists have said, they need to sort of work out a plan, but they need to prioritise the plan and they need to do some scenario planning. What I haven't seen is what a best case, mid case and worst case scenario would look like for this business and what are the actions that they could take in each of those cases. So certainly I'd like to see some scenario planning so that they at least have on the table for both of them what the various consequences are of the various options in front of them. And the second thing they need to do is talk to people. So they need to talk to their financiers, they need to talk to their accountant, they need to talk to their tax agent, they need to talk to their lawyer. most importantly, they need to talk to the German supplier. If that relationship is over, well, contractually, are they just going to end that relationship without any compensation? Is there an opportunity for them to have some service provision work going forward for a year or two, which would engineer a soft landing for that part of the business? It appears that relationship has just not been nurtured, and as you would know, you have to nurture any relationship in life, and that would be the first thing I would be doing, getting on a plane and going to Germany to have a pretty frank conversation with that vendor.
Can I just add, sorry, I think, I mean, I agree with all of those comments, but one key thing that's missing is the first step is actually, where are we now? And this is a real problem because they don't know what the relationship with the German supplier is. David doesn't know how far Angela has got with her ventures on the Gold Coast. Angela would have no idea what David's doing. So, another mistake that people make is they make plans going forward without having an accurate analysis of where we are now. So I think that's the most urgent step, is to really do a good analysis of where is our business, what are we doing, where are our relationships at, where is our finances at.
I think the combination of Suzanne's point and Nick's point about putting down a set of priorities and also having a situation analysis and taking stock is really what's happened here. I mean, in putting together the case study, they need someone, and I would heavily recommend that they not do it themselves. They need somebody to be able to put down in objective terms what the current situation is. They need advice. Who they turn to really at this stage is probably irrelevant, because it's going to be a lead into a suite of advisors, I would think, who will be able to assist them with various parts of the puzzle, as hopefully we've done throughout these presentations. But in the first instance, they need that very stark objective scenario analysis to say, right, well, let's put it down on paper. Let's both understand where we're at. And only once we know that situation can we start moving forward and work out what our priorities are, what a plan might be for the future.
Great. So, Wayne, you've already said that you've had a client in a similar circumstance. So, do the other panellists, have the other panellists ever seen these sorts of problems? Are they common with your clients, or is this a sort of an extreme situation?
Look, I think, my grin probably belies my response, but this is mostly what we see on a daily basis. Unfortunately, rarely is it the case that people will come and consult an insolvency practitioner or a business analyst at a point where they're sailing happily along. And perhaps that's the best time at which they ought to do that, because when there's no pressure, you can make changes, you can set a course for the future with little impact on the other variables that surround a business venture like this. But the unfortunate reality is that it's only when there are serious issues that prompt someone to take stock of the current situation that the reality becomes obvious, and oftentimes it's too late to fix. This is, whilst it's a fictional case study, it's built around facts from various real-life examples that we've had come through our practice, and it has happened, continues to happen, will continue to happen for a range of reasons. Some, obviously, as we've already discussed, within the protagonist's control, and some outside of it. But it is all too common, and it really, in a lot of cases, need not be.
We'll come back to that. What about you, Suzanne? Have you seen people in similar circumstances?
Certainly. And I think the main error, I think the key error that people make is, the lack of planning, obviously. But even when they do have a plan, has everyone been part of forming that plan? And do they even know where it is? Do they actually follow it? A lot of the time we put together documentation for businesses because it's a compliance thing. We must have a policy on this. We must have a plan for this. Does everyone understand it? And a lack of contingency planning. When things go wrong, what will we do? And so there's a lot of reactionary based situations where we're reacting to an urgent situation that we don't now have the time to properly address because we didn't think about it before. So it's that, it's a real lack of long-term planning and, having your map, having some sort of roadmap to follow so we all know where we're heading, not only where we're heading, but to be able to have some kind of measurement of where we are. Yeah. Just like with the marketing, yes, we can go off and spend, but how much do we have to spend and how much are we looking to get from this? So that forward planning, it always seems to be an issue because people are scared of that analysis paralysis, which we've been throwing around. But it's it's an investment that will save us time later. It feels like it takes a lot of time and effort, but it's that long-term result of it will save us so much later on down the track.
Okay. In businesses where you've got external investors, I doubt whether you would see this sort of scenario. External investors bring a level of corporate governance and planning and metrics that, in my experience, you may not see from a family business. So certainly we would encounter this possibility of this being an end game for one of our businesses, but I think we would have had visibility into what was likely to be a train wreck earlier. And if it was going to be a train wreck, I think the investors would have been looking to try and engineer what they would call a soft landing, where they decide whether to write off their investment, whether to disconnect from the board, whether to sell the equity back for a loss to the founders of the company. They may have encountered this situation, but they would have had visibility to it and tried to course correct as they went along. So from an investor perspective, you do get that good governance and certainly planning and KPIs and metrics that you're to a certain extent held to. That doesn't mean that we still don't have outcomes like this. We do.
Can I just add in here that we're painting a very pessimistic view at the moment. So I'd just like to reinforce that there are a lot of successful good businesses that we deal with as well. And so don't be scared of going into business.
Well, that's actually the next question I'm going to ask you. So, this is a very complicated case with lots of scenarios in it, but what do you think some of the main takeouts are for people to use in their own businesses, and what sort of signs and signals should they be looking out for?
I think one of the key ones that we see a lot of is people tend to have a great idea, and there are many people out there who have great ideas, but there's a long way between a good idea and a successful business. And one of the key aspects that I see people perhaps not devoting as much time or money to, for that matter, is advice, is seeking out good advice. I once heard a quote, I think it was from somebody citing Aristotle and Onassis, who said that if ever he was to become bankrupt, he would go and buy the best suit he could afford. He would go to the best bar or restaurant he could afford, and he would immerse himself in discussions and culture of successful people. And he would then, through osmosis, reinvent himself. And there have been plenty of people who've gone through the mill a few times, who've failed, succeeded, failed again, succeeded again, and ultimately they tend to bolt back to the surface. But I think getting good advice is really key at the outset, and listening to that advice. There's no point taking counsel and paying good rates for lawyers and accountants and business consultants and analysts and those sorts of people, and then thinking, well, they don't know what they're talking about, I know what I'm doing, and that sort of bravado ends up costing you quite a good deal of money. And
so do you include sort of advice from peers in that sort of networking?
Look, everybody's a $2 lawyer and a $2 accountant and a $2 expert. There's a recent case as recently as last week where the advice of an accountant and a lawyer were ignored by two people in business, and they went ahead with it anyway, and it's likely to cost them their house, and they'll be out on the street with 5 kids. So that sort of thing, it's risky. If you're going to take advice from peers, evaluate their experience. If they've never done what you're proposing to do, what is it about their experience that becomes attractive for you? Is it simply the fact that they're egging you on, saying, yeah, that's a really great idea, go and do it? Because that's an ego boost, that's not advice. But if they've been where you want to go and they've done what you want to do and they're successful at it, or even if they're not successful, they've got some lessons that you can learn, then perhaps temper that advice with some independent, objective analysis as well.
I think, as in any partnership, whether it's professional or personal, the biggest advocate for your ideas will be your partner. And so, if they're not on board or they don't know what you're doing, that's your key issue. You both, in a partnership, we both need to be heading in the same direction. We both need to be passionate about what we're doing. So I think, the lesson that I think David and Angela can learn here is that they obviously communication, but let's talk about what we want to do, how we're going to do it, and let's advocate for each other. So without that conversation, without having a shared goal, it is dismal, but you can fix that at any point if you invest that time in it.
The two that I've spoken about, plan and measure, are the two, but what I do recommend to clients also is to try and form an advisory board or an advisor or a mentor, as well as getting the professional advice. Most people are scared of the professional advice because of the cost of it, but there are business people that people know who would be just happy enough to help and to be a sounding board, and I think people need that. And the other thing is that people tend to keep seeking the advice that they want to hear and not take the advice of the person they've spoken. And we've had that a number of times, and that's not the right way to do it either. You may get a second opinion, but don't keep searching for the one that agrees with you all the time.
I think I would say, Anna, that you really need to make sure that you grow in a measured way. So when you are going into a new business, you need to make sure that you validate your market proposition, you validate your pricing, you make sure that you're not overexposing yourself in terms of the amount of money you're spending to expand or validate your business. The businesses that I've seen be most successful are ones who have grown in a measured way and have mitigated their downside. So those are the two lessons I think our audience would benefit from.
Great.
Just following slightly on from that, I mean, the tendency to forum shop in these circumstances is fairly wide, and we encounter that a lot as well. And I think, with particular reference to this example, at the point that they're at, these people are impoverished in many senses of the word. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough time. They don't have enough enthusiasm, and they don't have enough emotional capital without some sort of support to invest in rescuing what is potentially, although difficult, a rescuable situation. And when Nick talks about engineering a soft landing and external investors looking at retreating in a measured way, so too I think David and Angela now need to look at what can be saved in the most productive way, and prioritising those things. If they come to a conclusion that the business has gone to a point where it can't be saved, what can be saved? What elements of this? Can they save some sort of income out of this? Can they save their relationship? Can they save their family? Can they save their personal assets? So it's then the analysis changes from what can we do to save the business to what needs to be saved, and prioritising almost from the bottom up.
As well as what is most important to us.
Yeah,
what
that's
was
wants and
most
needs
important
analysis,
to us.
yeah.
Because sometimes you make rash decisions and end up being a completely different company to what
Absolutely.
you started
Yep.
out as wanting to do.
And that-
So
Very true.
again, taking stock of why are we doing this? Why did we start this?
That unintended growth, or unanticipated growth, and all of a sudden you look around and say, how on earth did we get here?
Exactly.
We didn't want to be here, but here is where you are.
That's a whole other case study, Tony.
Absolutely.
Just on that conversation, we've talked about looking at things from different perspectives. When you have a client and they have a range of issues, do you find looking at it from different perspectives actually helps define what the real issue is and to come up with a solution? Or do you need to break it down to very specific silos? What works best in actually defining what the problem for a business is?
I think initially, yes, you have to have a holistic view because, just like a doctor, you can't just concentrate on one symptom, but what's actually happening here and what's causing things, because, you may be dealing with, the financial side, and then you discover that's actually not the real issue. We have, partners sabotaging each other or whatever it might be, which means we're going to end up in the same boat 2 months down the track, a year down the track. So you've got to initially look at it holistically to work out what are the problems, where are they coming from, and which problems link with each other. Then you can make a decision on what you need to concentrate on. But certainly you've got to have a holistic view of it initially.
I like the medical analogy. And I try and simplify things when I'm discussing with clients, because a lot of what we talk about can be a little bit jargonistic and esoteric. So, I like the medical idea of a differential diagnosis. We know that there's a problem. What could the possible causes of the problem be? Let's sit down and let's brainstorm those for a little minute, and let's get all of the facts on paper, because often you'll get the story again of what the client wants you to hear and understand. But teasing out the real issues takes some time and some skill, and is often reluctantly released. So being able to drill down to that root cause often takes some time. It's ultimately driven by the clients and the success of your relationship with them. In our particular instances, we only see people for very brief times at the outset, and getting them to trust you, to understand that you're there as a help and to assist their situation is really the key. But going through that diagnostic process of not trying to leap to and accept what you're being told and leap to acceptance of that conclusion, but really to look at what, as Suzanne says, the entirety of the circumstances, and even outside of the business, because there are many circumstances which are driven by external factors, which may not be apparent to the people who are immersed in it in a day-to-day scenario, who really sort of sit there with the blinkers on and potentially can ignore what's going on.
It's a much more efficient way to do it as well, because if you have a mouse problem, you can go and kill each mouse as it comes, but if you discover that you have kids' lunchbox filled with bananas and rolled under the bed, if you had to remove that, you wouldn't have to continually be killing mice, if you know what I mean. So the cause of the problem is only going to be found holistically. Okay.
I'd like to propose to my fellow panellists that this might be the best thing that ever happened to, Angela and David, that they may have been struggling along without actually opening their minds and saying maybe the best thing is for us to wind up these businesses, for us to separate as a couple, for us to just start again and move on with our lives. And I think having an open mind in these situations to things that maybe not are being talked about as possible paths going forward may be the best thing that happens to them. One of the things I always talk to my entrepreneurs when they are in difficult situations, I say two things to them. Has anyone died and has anyone got cancer? Because those situations are incredibly serious, and if they've ever impacted anyone's lives, you know how impactful they are to you and your family. These situations are not those two situations, and so once you understand that it's not an absolute worst case scenario, you can start to be a little bit more pragmatic about what the possible outcomes are.
However, in saying that, like we keep talking about David and Angela splitting and the company splitting and those sorts of things, often the strongest companies have come from a place where things have fallen down, they've done everything wrong. But if they've learned all the lessons, they can use that to then rebuild and not make the same mistakes. So, these poor decisions or situations where, do feel dire can actually lead to a lot of success because we've learned from that. So, it's not a bad base for them to start from.
Absolutely.
There is a sorry, Tim,
Or
I
restart.
mean, there is a sort of cathartic element to all of this, so where there can be the to move away from the financial industry's term of what a phoenix might be, but I mean there is a sort of phoenix element to these things where, as you say, there can be good that arises from what are fundamentally bad circumstances. So it's not uncommon, but it should be more common than it is.
But I agree with what you were saying before too, that you've got to virtually drill down to find out what the real reasons are. And the Phoenix may not be anything like this. It may be something completely different. And when you're drilling down, you might find out that the whole reason that she moved to the Gold Coast was because they were having marital problems. It may have been the basis for the whole new business. So unless you understand those problems, you can't have the Phoenix. But once you do understand those, yes, I think there's a good opportunity for a Phoenix to come about.
And I think in order to get to the bottom of that, the one key thing that these people need is time. So what can you bring to this situation that enables things to slow down, to slow down the actions of the German supplier, to slow down the actions of the local contractors who are obviously suffering, to slow down the bleeding of money which is happening in the Gold Coast venture, to slow all of that down to a point where you can actually compartmentalise the particular problems and then deal with the ones that are the most pressing. So the ability to buy time in these circumstances, there are various ways in which you can do that, through sort of formal measures that impose moratoriums on things, but also informal arrangements where you can, implore the people you're dealing with to just give you a little bit more time. That's going to be key because, as I said before, you're not going to get necessarily the root cause of the problem and therefore divine some solution straight away within the first 1, 2, 3, 7 hours of dealing with this problem. It's going to take you some time. And that time leads to some creativity on the part of the advisors because there are often very creative solutions that emerge from this sort of analysis. So
I think if they had a couple of hours, half a day or a day with the four of us, we could really identify what the opportunities are for resolving.
Maybe there's an entrepreneurial opportunity in
There's an
that.
offer there.
Can I just ask you a question, that comes from my personal curiosity? How many of you have dealt with companies on the growth path where it's been perfectly smooth?
Hands up.
Exactly. So I guess that's an important point. That no growth path is simple and linear. There's always going to be hiccups along the way.
They're different challenges.
Yeah.
That's right. So just one last question and then we'll wrap up. So we've explored this case study from a business performance perspective, a legal perspective, a financial, people and investment perspective. Is there anything else people should think about when they're looking at their business and how it needs to be structured or diversified or whatever? What other key things should people be looking at in terms of their own business, do you think?
I think marketing and PR is a big one. It's, people tend to be in two different minds. It's either we'll do it ourselves, we don't want to waste money on advertising and marketing experts, or they spend a lot of money on it but it's not targeted. And I think marketing is actually quite a challenge. It's really difficult to, one, find who is your target market. What do they look like and what do they need? What are their preferred communication styles? What are their preferred forums for receiving information from you? I think marketing and PR is actually quite a complex area that a lot of businesses do need a bit of help with.
And they don't always understand the story they're trying to sell.
No. Or they can't make the customer understand it. I understand it, but it's not making sense to my clients. Yeah.
I think that for me, when I'm talking to an entrepreneur who's about to go on this journey, I really want to understand who they are and whether they understand what this journey is going to be like. And so I spend a lot of time with them really trying to understand whether they have what it takes to face the abyss many, many times on that journey and not lose faith and have the personal strength to be able to get through that. A lot of entrepreneurs are enamoured by the romance of starting a business, and they see, unfortunately, our media promotes the wildly successful entrepreneurs, we have them up as role models and we think, well, we could be as good as that person. They don't profile the 999 other people along the way that failed and had sort of challenges along the way. And so I really try and point out and have a conversation around, are you really ready for this journey? Because if you can help them understand what their risk profile is themselves, you can actually avoid them going on a journey that could be financially and personally and emotionally quite damaging for them. So I think you have to understand what the journey is you're about to take.
Yeah, so resilience is definitely key.
It is.
If you look at people like, the most successful entrepreneurs, they've gone bankrupt how many times, but they keep reinventing themselves bigger and better every time.
Yes.
Tony?
I really like Nick's point. I mean, it's part of where I go with my wants and needs analysis at various times. It's really trying to understand what is it that at your core you want to achieve. I mean, what's your life's ambition? What's your goal? Because if you're not up for it, don't start. Okay, and that gets back to my sort of stick to the netting argument.
Yeah.
I mean, as subsets of what we've looked at, I think looking at this from a family law perspective is also quite valuable, because there are issues that arise from this example which do have some obvious family law flavours about them. And family law isn't as cut and dried as many might think. We involve ourselves in that area of the law on occasion, and it really does have some creative elements to it that allow for businesses that are imperiled through family law problems to continue on without it necessarily being a death knell and there having to be a separation of all the assets and so on. The other one was looking at it from just where do you sit in the world, and that combines, I guess, all of these things.
It does. Expectation.
Yeah.
Understanding what your own expectation is of life, and not having an expectation that is, outside of your capability. If you have modest expectations, life will be good because you'll constantly exceed your expectations. If you have ambitious expectations and you don't have the skills to get there, you'll always be unhappy.
See, the family issue is something that we probably haven't touched on very much either. A lot of people say don't go into business with family, but family businesses can be extremely successful. One thing that you do need to remember though is, especially if it's a husband-wife partnership, don't assume that you know what your partner is like in a work situation. Even though you know what they're like at home, you know what they're like at leisure, you know what they're like with their children, they could be completely different at work. So it's getting to know them from a different perspective is a really important before you go into a business partnership if you already have a marital partnership.
And put in the level, I mean, there's extra protections that need to go into preserving the interpersonal relationship if the business relationship fails. So that's the extra pitfall that presents itself in a closely held business.
Absolutely. All right, well, I think you'll all agree that we got some really useful advice there. So again, that brings us to the end of David and Angela's journey, hopefully not the end. But again, I'd like to thank our wonderful panel, Tony Lane, Susanna Evans, Wayne Boland, Nick McNaughton, and of course Scott Chamberlain in his absence. So if you have any other questions, you can always get in touch with Lighthouse. But thank you to everybody, and that's a wrap.
Thank you.